Well, hey, everybody, it's your boy, Mr. Perry, and let's get ready for Oedipus the King unit notes. So you should have in front of you the fill in the blank notes sheet that was provided in class. If not, you can hop on over to Classroom and you can print one off of the Classroom stream. But let's go ahead and get into this. I just want to remind everybody that if you take good notes and pay attention here, you get to use all of your notes on your open book, open notes assessments. So definitely pay attention and bring good questions to class. So before we get into ancient Greek theater and Oedipus Rex, the first thing I want to do is I want to look at modern day theaters. So this is a stadium performance. It looks almost like it could be some kind of ancient Greek performance or something like that, but you're probably familiar with what we call stadium seating, where you've got the stage down here and everybody kind of sitting in these different tiers and stuff like that. You go to Comerica Park today, you're familiar with a very similar kind of setup, again, stadium style seating with the rows and everybody's kind of above, the people below them, and then the performance is happening down below. And then you're also probably familiar with really elaborate productions like The Lion King, for instance, where you have actors that are using some fairly elaborate costuming and masks and things of that nature to kind of represent being different characters and all that kind of stuff. So I just want you to keep all of this in mind as we go back to ancient Greek time and look at the ancient Greek theaters. So this is an ancient Greek theater, built way back in ancient Greek times. We are in Athens here. And when we get into Oedipus and we start talking about Oedipus, this is, the kind of setup that the ancient Greeks had. And I just want you to notice the influence that the ancient Greeks had, because they were the first ones to do this. The ancient Greeks were the first ones to actually start having performances and to really kind of encourage the arts and the humanities and kind of making that an important part of their culture. And one of the ways that they did that is they put on these plays like Oedipus, and they performed them by building in this kind of tiered seating into the sides of mountains. But again, it's just before we hop into the nuts and bolts of Oedipus and the culture of ancient Greek drama, I just want you to notice at just how profoundly influential the ancient Greeks were in terms of how they did this, as compared to in modern times how we attend performances and take in performances with other people. Let's go ahead and start attacking our fill-in-the-blank notes here. So one thing that's important to note here is that the ancient Greek civilization, they were the first ones who had plays. They invented drama. And it started off actually as a religious ceremony. The ancient Greeks were a very religious society, and they had a lot of different gods that they worshipped and all that stuff. And they used to put on these performances where they would have groups of people called the chorus, kind of, singing to the gods and, having prayers and things of that nature. A really, really central part of their culture, right? So this is an example of what the chorus, might have looked like, a group of people wearing these masks. Well, one day there was a guy named Thespis who was a member of the chorus who decided to step away from the chorus and speak back to them as if he was this kind of spiritual entity. And, it totally blew everybody's minds. They were like, whoa, Thespis just, stepped aside and, pretended to be this god, and we were talking back and forth, and wow, that was really cool. And basically that was how drama was invented. They were just the whole idea of having an actor play a character, play a role, and the whole idea of having this exchange of dialogue was, something that was born out of ancient Greek drama. So it started as this religious ceremony, just with this group of people, but then eventually Thespis stepped away. And that's what gives us the word thespian. If you look at, the fancy word for actor today, they are referred to as thespians, and that's a reference to Thespis. And here is a little bit of a sculpture, apparently, of what Thespis looked like. So eventually, after this happened, they started writing stories, and eventually stories were written to depict and kind of reinforce really important cultural beliefs from the ancient Greeks. So these plays ended up, they began as religious ceremonies, and then they morphed into these really important ways to reinforce the foundational ancient Greek beliefs. So they had a place of high prominence in society. There was the plays actually took place during the festival of Dionysus, and they were a competition. The plays were performed in outdoor theaters, and they were attended by thousands. And playwrights competed against one another for prizes and prestige. So you would write a trilogy of plays, and then you would, perform them with actors in front of thousands of people. And then again, there was a judging ceremony that would take place, and whatever playwright was given the top prize would have, all of this status, right? And there were three genres of plays. There were tragedies, and then comedies and farce. And comedies and farce are very similar to one another, but the tragedies were the ones that were most important. The tragedies were the ones that really held the place of high status in society, and they were the ones that became extraordinarily influential. And then plays, basically the plays were choral lyrics based on myths. So they were song lyrics, basically, and they were intended to be sung by a group of people. But every once in a while, the songs would be interrupted with dialogue. So there would be scenes of characters, having dialogue back and forth, and then the chorus would come back out, and then there would be like this kind of musical interlude, right? So that's basically the structure of the plays during their time. A little bit on the ancient Greek religion. The ancient Greeks were polytheistic, so they worshipped many gods. Latin and Greek roots. You've got poly meaning many, and then theism is belief, very often associated with spiritual belief or religious belief. So polytheistic. They worshipped many gods. And the ancient Greeks also believed in fate, this divine force that was actually personified by three sisters. And they believed that fate was stronger than any of the gods. So you could not argue against fate. You could not fight your fate. You were just supposed to accept your fate and live your life the best that you could. They also felt that the gods would become angry with people who were guilty of certain aspects like pride or any other kind of excess. If you were super arrogant, if you stole things and hoarded things for yourself, they felt that the gods would become angry with you and then would start to punish you. So what that meant was people were supposed to live moderately and correctly. You were supposed to basically live a good life, a life where you contributed to society, and you didn't take too much for yourself, right? That was some of the fundamental beliefs of ancient Greek society. There was also the god of Apollo. So Apollo is a super important god. Oh, sorry, not Apollo Creed. That's from Rocky. No, that's Apollo. That's the one we're talking about. So Apollo was this super important god, very influential in ancient Greek times. And they believed that Apollo was the sun god, the god that kind of carried the sun from, if you looked at the sky and you saw the sun rise over here and then travel and then set over here, they thought that Apollo was the one who kind of made that happen. So he was known as the sun god. He was also known as the archer, and was very famous for slaying this python at an area called Delphi. Apollo was also the lover of music and poetry and the bringer of plagues. So when you see Apollo being depicted with his bow and arrow, for instance, if there was a sickness or a plague in society, they felt that Apollo was firing these arrows down onto their land and afflicting, them with some kind of plague, some kind of disease. So Apollo is, I want to point out the Latin and Greek root apo, meaning far or away, and that's kind of how they looked at with Apollo. They looked at him as somebody who could shoot his arrows very far and who would, carry the sun this long distance, right? So Apollo is as a, the personification of Apollo is always associated with kind of distance and traveling and, things of that nature. And then there is Sophocles the playwright. So Sophocles is how you say his name, and he is the author of Oedipus. His big contribution to ancient Greek theater was that he introduced a third actor to the stage. So that gives you an idea of how simple and basic their plays were. Before Sophocles, any play only featured two characters on stage at a time. And Sophocles was the one who was like, oh, I'm going to kick this up a notch. I'm going to introduce a third actor to the stage. So when we're reading Oedipus, we'll see that, there's the chorus who is always out in their little area. But as far as the stage goes, you'll see that we'll have up to 3 characters on stage at a time. He was the first one who did that. He is generally the one who is considered the person who brought Greek drama to its highest form of art. So, his plays were considered the greatest, right? And a little bit more about him. He was a member of the ruling class in Athens, and he was very sympathetic to social inequalities in his society. He did not like to see, upper class people keeping things for themselves, whereas lower class people had very little. And so that is often mentioned in his plays. And he warned other Greeks that their prejudices and social inequality would result in their destruction. That was kind of a common theme in a lot of his plays, and certainly one that we're going to see in Oedipus. So now let's talk about your ancient Greek actors. So the ancient Greek actors were actually really important to their society. Performing in plays was considered a civic duty. So kind of like paying your taxes is a civic duty. Attending jury duty is, a civic duty. Voting in elections is a civic duty. For them, performing in plays was also a civic duty. One actor would play several roles, so the costumes were very simple and symbolic. They had to be able to switch characters very quickly, so they didn't have a lot of elaborate costuming, but there were, some simple costumes that could be switched out or altered. So the actors wore simple costumes called a chiton, as well as platform shoes and a dramatic mask. The platform shoes were to make them taller, because of course you have your audience sitting on the sides of a mountain, and the stage is way down here, and so they needed the actors to be larger. They needed them to be a little bit taller. This, of course, if you go to see a performance today, you've got the projection screen, you got the big screen TVs and all that stuff. Well, they didn't have that, so they did what they could to make the actors a little bit bigger so that they'd be visible from even people in the back row. And then the other main thing that they used were these masks. So you're probably familiar with the drama masks, the happy and sad mask, which has become kind of the universal symbol for plays and theater and drama. And this is actually a reference to, in ancient Greek times, if you were an actor playing several different roles, you wore different masks to switch those roles. And the masks also had funnels built into them to help them project the voice even louder. So they performed a couple of functions. They would project your voice, and then they would also identify who you are. They would identify social class and gender of the characters. And masks were also in the expression most dominant of a character's personality. So for a tragedy like Oedipus, where Oedipus is going to find out all kinds of horrible things about himself, something like this might be appropriate, right? Whereas if you were playing a god-like character, then you might do something a little bit more like this. So again, this is the theater of Dionysus at Athens. So this is where the plays would take place, and then up here is where the festival would take place. And again, these were really, really big parts of the culture. And again, just one more view of the ancient Greek theater built into the mountainside. And then this is actually a kind of a computer rendering of what it would have looked like back in ancient Greek times. So this would be the palace of Oedipus at the beginning of the play. And this right here is the stage. This is where the actors would come out and perform their lines and all that stuff. Down here, this is called the orchestra. And this is where the chorus would come out, that group of people, and they would perform their part of the play down here. All right, so we're going to learn a little bit about what are called oracles. Oracles were very important, once again, like so many other things in this play, to ancient Greek culture. So oracles were well-respected shrines where one could seek answers to questions about one's future. And the Oracle of Apollo at Delphi was one of the most important Greek oracles, and it's one that is going to be referenced in Oedipus very frequently. What would happen was, a citizen would go to an oracle, would make a request, usually to a priestess, and then that priestess would carry the message to the inner part of the oracle, usually like a cave or something like that, and then would receive some kind of message. And the messages were often vague and open to interpretation. So you might get a message about your future, or you might get an answer to your question, but oftentimes the language was a little bit ambiguous and, again, open to interpretation. And then now we're just going to kind of get into some basic terms that are associated with ancient Greek drama. So the form of Greek tragedy. So any Greek tragedy, like Oedipus the King or Oedipus Rex, is going to alternate between dramatic scenes and what are called the stasimons. Now, the dramatic scenes are where you have characters on stage performing dialogue. The stasimons are different. The stasimons are when the chorus comes out, and the chorus is meant to represent the voice of the common citizens. And what the stasimons do is the chorus reflects on the events from the play, and then they ask questions about the future. And the stasimons are actually broken down into what's called the strophe and the antistrophe, and I'll explain that more in class when we get to it. So what else do we have? Some other drama terms. Well, let's go back to your Shakespeare unit when you learned about Romeo and Juliet and all of that stuff. A tragedy in general, just so you know, in ancient Greek language, it translates to goat song. But what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to tell the story of the rise and fall of a tragic hero. So not necessarily the greatest of all time, but a tragic hero, somebody who has some heroic qualities, but also has some kind of flaw. A tragic hero, again, is a successful person, somebody who's kind of admirable, has some good in him, but has some kind of flaw that ultimately leads to the hero's downfall. And it is some kind of negative personality trait. Now, in ancient Greek times, they very often used what's called hubris for the tragic flaw. And hubris is a reference to excessive pride. So when you're really full of yourself and you're super arrogant and you just believe that you are the best person or the greatest hero or whatever, if you believe that you're untouchable and you can do whatever you want and there's going to be no consequences, that's excessive pride. That means you're guilty of hubris, and it is often portrayed as a tragic flaw in the main character. And another term that is associated with tragedy is what's called catharsis. And this is the idea that as an audience member, you could be in the audience, sitting on the mountainside, watching this play, experiencing all of these horrible events as you watch the tragic hero go through what they go through. And by living through somebody else's really terrible, tragic moments, it kind of is like a stress reliever for you. And the ancient Greeks believed that there was kind of a purging or a cleansing of the audience's emotions through the tragedy of the main character. So that general concept is what's called catharsis. Basically, getting all of the bad stuff out of your own system by witnessing somebody else's bad stuff, All right, what else do we have? Let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into the chorus. The chorus is a group of people, usually 15 to 20 men. Unfortunately, ancient Greek times were, they discriminated against women. They only allowed men to be actors. And of course, this survived well into Shakespeare's time as well. The chorus was always on stage, and they frequently sang and danced as a group. They always had a leader who carried on a dialogue with the main character or with the rest of the chorus. And in terms of what they do, what is the function of the chorus? So this is what you put down in your notes. The function of the chorus is to set the tone for the play, and they very often provide background information. The chorus likes to recall, interpret, and summarize what just happened. So A scene will unfold between some characters, and then the chorus will come out and they'll comment about what just happened. They like to ask questions. They like to, kind of ratchet up the tension a little bit and ask questions about what's going to happen in the future. And then every once in a while, the chorus can give opinions or advice. So if one of the characters asks the chorus their opinion or advice, then they can provide it. But for the most part, they act like a jury and they stay objective. They basically, they're kind of like a proxy for the audience. They kind of stand in for the audience, right? Just like the audience is watching the play unfold and the audience is supposed to be objective and make judgments and all that stuff, the chorus actually does that as a part of the play. All right, so let's wrap this up. There's a few other things that are worth knowing about ancient Greek drama. They had to observe what are called the three unities. Anytime you wrote a tragedy, you had to make sure that your play observed the three unities. And so there's what's called the unity of time. The entire action of the play has to take place within one day. And the dialogue can provide background info if like something happened last year or yesterday or whatever. The dialogue can reference it, but the actual action of the play needs to unfold within the span of 24 hours. There's what's called unity of place. So the action was limited to one setting. So there was only one unchanged set that was used. And then there's what's called the unity of subject. The focus was on one main character and one plot. There were no subplots. So its simplicity at the end of the day was kind of what the three unities were all about. Your play has to take place within one day. It's got to take place in one location, and it needs to focus on one topic. And then finally, some other terms that we're going to see from our rhetorical terms packet. We're going to see paradox, which is a statement or an idea that contradicts itself but is still true. We're going to see oxymoron, which is a word or a phrase that contradicts itself. It's kind of like a paradox condensed into a 2 or 3 word phrase. You're going to see lots of juxtaposition, which is placing opposite ideas side by side for the sake of contrast. We're going to see lots of dramatic irony. Obviously, this is a drama. This is a tragedy. So the audience is going to have access to knowledge that a character on stage will not. And that's going to set up what's called dramatic irony. Many characters are going to use what's called apostrophe, which is calling out to an abstract idea such as death. Or to a deceased person. If you just call out to somebody who is not on stage and maybe is dead, or if you're calling out to something that isn't actually a person, then again, that is apostrophe. And very often it's preceded with the word "oh." So it'll be like, "Oh, death, why have you blah, 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 blah." That would be an example of apostrophe. And then finally, there's what's called an epithet, which is where you have a descriptive nickname attached to a person's real name. Any of you guys who are fans of Game of Thrones are very familiar with epithets. There were many characters in Game of Thrones where, you've got the person's name, but then, they had some kind of descriptive nickname attached to it. So we'll see some examples of that in class, and we'll go over that in class as well. And with that, my friends, you have come to the end of your Oedipus background notes. I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you in class.